Thunder, and I was born in Wausau, Wisconsin. I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and my Hoocąk name is Hoocąk Kitty, Return of Thunders. Mm-hmm. So looking at the names, I actually recognize a lot of the names, or I've heard them before. It makes me think about how some families, they go differently about giving children their names, their Indian names, Hoocąk names. Some families, they'll ask an elder, and an elder will maybe think of a story and maybe name that child after an event in that story or some type of happening. Other families, they will say, this was my choka's name, so now it's your name. And it was also his choka's name, so now you have it. And so I see a lot of those names in there. And I also see a lot of names from stories that I've heard before in the past, a lot of white con stories. I see those names being used. So I think that's pretty interesting, pretty neat. The ones that I do recognize, there is the village in Madison and the village in La Crosse. Both places, from what I was told, were huge gathering places for people from many different tribes. They would gather in, for instance, I heard La Crosse. At any one time you could find close to 50,000 natives there, and they would be there trading, and not only just trading goods, but knowledge. I don't know if tech is the right word as well, but just things that would be useful for people to trade, and they could take home and it'd be useful, at home. So when I visit these places, I love to think that there were people living there, that they had memories there, that they shared their lives with each other in these places. My Jaji once told me that every place, every forest, every waterway, and every hill has a name. And in these areas that people once lived, they had names for those places, and they have memories and they have stories about those places. And they lived there. We were migrating people, but they lived their whole lives in these places. So they have all these memories of these places there. And that's what I think of when I visit these places, that, our ancestors were living there and they lived there their whole lives. And just kind of like how I'm living my life now, and I think about Sheboygan and I have all these memories, and my family is from northern Wisconsin and I have all these memories about going to northern Wisconsin, Antigo, Wausau, and just life wasn't so different between now and then, so that's what I think of when I go to these different places, just the memories of what happened there. Again, we call it portage wa. Wa is taking something and pushing it above your head like this. So that refers to portage, right? Portaging, I guess. Putting stuff in your boat and then you lift it above your head and carry it to the next access point on the river. So that's how portage got its name. There is one other thing I heard. I was driving with a friend, and we were going up to a feast at Kenny Funmaker's Wanachira. And we drove past the prison out here. And just south of there, he pointed there, and it's all marshy out there kind of. And he said, back in there's little plot of land, and he said there's a lot of Hoocąks buried back there. That's the only other thing I've ever heard about Portage area. I was told one story about the agency house, that at the time, the agent who ran the place, I can't remember if he was distributing actual money or if it was his job to distribute food and supplies, but I had heard that he had stopped distributing, and so the Hoocąks in the area, they got really upset with him, and they actually surrounded the agency house, and the people inside the house were obviously really scared, and so they started to nail up boards on the window framing, and they say that when you go in there now, you can see the nail holes in the window frame still. I grew up in a medium-sized city, so daily, all the way from elementary school to high school, I could hear different languages being spoken in school. I could hear Spanish, Hmong, Chinese, French, and German being spoken all the time. And I was always just fascinated with, how people could just be speaking one language one minute and then another language the next minute. Growing up too, my best friends were bilingual. They would be speaking English to me and then turn around and be speaking Spanish to their parents. And I was actually almost kind of jealous about that ability to be able to do that. And I always had a knack for picking up new languages as well. So when I turned 20, I moved to Madison and went to school, and I started working at the bingo hall. And I just wanted to learn, I knew I wanted to learn Hoocąk, and I was asking a lot of people that worked there, a lot of Hoocąk people, and nobody knew how to speak any Hoocąk, and I was really naive at the time. I thought, a lot of people spoke Hoocąk, and because I didn't grow up around any Hoocąks, I didn't know that almost nobody spoke it. So I drove up to Boston, which is the language division headquarters, and I got all the books and tapes and CDs they would give me, and I started studying on my own, even just for fun in my spare time. I didn't know how any of it translated, what the words meant. I just memorized the words and what the sentence meant in English. And shortly after that, I heard about an adult language camp, and they gave me a booklet to study before I went there. And they said, study this booklet because when you're in the camp, you're not going to be able to take notes or look at your booklet or anything like that. So just make sure to study this before you come. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I memorized it front to back. And I must have made an impression on him because it was like a week or two later, I was working and the phone in front of me rang, and I picked it up, and it was Henning Garvin, and he worked for language at the time, still does. And he said, hey, there's an opening coming up here for a language associate, I want you to apply for it. And I said, okay, let me think about it, because it was less money, less hours, no insurance, and I would have to drive like a half hour there and a half hour back. So I thought about it for like a day, but I recognized what an opportunity it was, and it was actually where I wanted to be. So I took it, and my first day was on May 1st, 2006, and that very same day I learned that I was actually chosen for the Hoocąk apprentice program, and I didn't even know it. And starting in July 1st of that year, I would get like a $4 raise. I'd get benefits. I'd be working 40 hours a week, and I would be paired with a speaker, and it would just be my job to learn Hoocąk. Mm-hmm. So taking a gamble paid off. So I think everything that we do culturally, identity, socially is all encapsulated in the language. So preserving a language helps us preserve those other outlets. For instance, Hoocąk humor. We have, one of our strengths is our humor, and I witness it and I live through it every day, but we do it in English. And Hoocąk humor using the Hoocąk language is something I rarely encounter now. Back when there were more speakers around, I used to work with some really funny guys, and they would tell funny stories, say funny things, and hearing it in the Hoocąk language is really special. It's really unique. I almost can't put it into words, but it's a different type of humor. And when you try to translate it into English, say somebody who doesn't know, and they say, "Oh, why are those guys laughing? What was the joke?" And you say in English, it's not as funny or anything. It's nowhere near as funny. So that's one thing that I really miss, is hearing the Hoocąk humor within the language. But that's just one little piece. So I think it's really important that we do preserve the language so we can hold on to those little things here and there. Mm-hmm. Time, definitely time. Time with the speakers, the native speakers that we do have, down to everybody's individual time, the time that they themselves have to dedicate to the language. Again, I'll reference Henning Garvin here. He said learning Hoocąk is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes time, it takes dedication, and not everybody always has the time to dedicate an hour a day, 30 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day to learning Hoocąk, and it becomes even harder when you do study and there's nobody to speak to. So I think time's our biggest enemy right now. My most rewarding experience was we opened a Hoocąk language immersion daycare, and one day I was sitting there and I was actually feeding one of the kids in his high chair, and in this daycare we spoke nothing but Hoocąk to the kids, and all of a sudden the door opened and the kid looks at me and he says "Chokaji," and that's a full Hoocąk sentence being spoken by a child. And that was very rewarding, here's a little child, and he just spoke Hoocąk spontaneously all by himself. That was very rewarding. That was probably one of the most rewarding experiences in my career, was working with the Hoocąk immersion daycare. So when language division first started, it was to maintain and preserve the language and revitalize it. I believe now those are the same efforts that we have. It's taken on another job, which is documenting and archiving the language. How I fit in is my background is in audio and video, and so I love to create content for the language division. That is my job, and that's how I fit into it. I love coming up with creative ways to create engaging content for viewers. That's my main goal, is to keep viewers engaged. If we're going to put out, or if I'm going to make a video on a language lesson, I want it to be where the viewer is constantly engaged and just, they're not lulled into just, looking at their phone or doing something else and I'm just in the background. I want them to have their eyes on the content the whole time, so. What stands out to me the most is just how resilient the Hoocąk people are. Not many people know, but just through our oral tradition, again, I had heard many stories. even long before Columbus got here, that there was an extermination attempt on the Hoocąk people. There was a time where the Hoocąks, we treated our neighbors pretty harshly. As an elder told me, we used to beat up on them pretty badly. Enough to drive them to a point where they formed a coalition to try to wipe us out. And in the story that I heard, our numbers got down to less than 1,000, but we came back from that. And then we survived another extermination attempt by colonizers. And then we survived the flu. And then now we've been surviving 200 years of institutional corruption. So I would say the Hoocąk people are resilient. But now that I'm much older, I look at people across the world and in different populations, and human beings across the planet are just resilient beings. So. To me, it is always to learn something from it. That is the most important reason to remember history, is so you can learn from it. I wouldn't want all the sacrifices that my ancestors made to be for naught if I don't walk away with any knowledge from it. So, as I said before, I didn't grow up around any Hoocąks. So my education on our history really started when I started with the language division, and I couldn't really say it was any one person because I was working with so many people at the time. And but I would, if I had to, put names on them, my Jaji Richard Mann was huge. He's the leader of our little group in the Feast Lodge, so I learned a lot through him. Cloris Lowe Sr. I spent most of my apprenticeship with him, so I learned a lot from him, a lot. And then there was Bill O'Brien. When I first started with language, me and him just sat at a table every day for 8 hours a day and just talked. So I learned a lot of stories from him, a lot of history from him. And then there was George Stacy Sr. Actually, when I first started my apprenticeship, I actually lived with him, so I spent a lot of time with him, and he, put me up on a lot of history. So this is really more of a piece of advice to them, and that is, soak it up, take it all in, learn as much as you can. It seems to always be the situation where, even with my elders, even living with me, we always look back and think, oh geez, I wish I would have made better use of the time learning things and remembering things and learning more knowledge, because someday you're going to be in the position where people are coming to you to ask you things. I'm not an elder, but I'm getting, already getting a lot of questions, especially about language. That's my area of expertise, I guess, if you want to say. But I'm getting a lot of questions, and I always think to myself, oh geez, I heard that word before. I wish I would have maybe written it down, or maybe just listened a little bit closer, or I heard a story about this, but I can't remember all the details. Just when I was making my last video, I was talking about New Lisbon. We called it Hoocąk, and there was a story about it, and I can't remember it. So it's one of those things, just to tell the younger people just to listen a little bit closely, listen a little bit closer, and just try to remember things.
Yeah.